Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
Monica Padilla felt the pull of her heels against the casino floor, every step heavy, like walking through wet sand. At 41, she'd gotten used to the uniform, black, sleek, sharp. But she could already feel her father's eyes on her as she stepped into their living room. His laugh cracked through the air like a gunshot. "Oh, look at you! The cocktail girl is here." His words were meant to sting, laced with that casual, disapproving bite that made her stomach twist every time. Monica didn't even flinch. It wasn't the first time. She'd just left a high-level audit summit, a closed-door meeting where every word mattered. But she said nothing. Her father wouldn't understand, wouldn't believe her anyway. Instead, she plastered on the smile she'd learned to wear when the mocking started at age 13, when she first got a taste of the distance between her and the rest of the family. Her mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face pale, eyes darting between Monica and her father. Monica's sister Dana, perched on the arm of the couch, didn't even look up. Dana never looked up. And then there was Leo, her golden boy brother, the only one her father seemed to ever truly see. He wasn't here tonight. Monica let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Years of feeling invisible, years of silencing the sharp edge of resentment. I could have told them, she thought, her mind tracing the years of secrets kept, years of tracking fraud, handling criminal investigations in high-stakes government compliance. But what would it have mattered? Her father would have just laughed harder. Maybe that's why she kept it to herself. Maybe she was just tired of trying to make them understand. The moment my phone buzzed in my purse, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't just the random numbers flashing across the screen. It was the urgency in the ring. Dana. I hesitated like I knew I wasn't ready for whatever this was. "Monica, you need to come home. It's Leo." Dana's voice cracked. A cold weight settled in my chest. "What happened?" I asked, low. I could barely hear her through the sudden ringing in my ears. She sucked in a breath. "They arrested him. The FBI raided his house this morning." For a second, everything around me blurred. The sleek, sterile conference room where I'd been listening to some compliance seminar droned on. The whiteboard in front of me. The murmurs of my colleagues around me. None of it mattered. "Wait, what?" I whispered, my throat tight. "They said it's financial fraud, Monica. A huge one. It's about the mentorship program he ran for kids. Something about money being diverted. They think he's been stealing." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And Mom's heart's acting up. She's not good, Monica. Dad hasn't spoken all day." The world shifted. The ground under me didn't feel stable. I didn't know which part to process first. Leo, arrested. The FBI, the money, my parents falling apart. I looked down at the paperwork on the table in front of me, the piles of audit reports, spreadsheets, and compliance regs. It all felt like the most trivial thing in the world. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice sounding too calm, too distant. I ended the call and sat there for a second, staring at my phone. The others at the table didn't notice, or maybe they didn't care. The drive back to Indiana felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. The interstate was heavy with rain, a steady rhythm that matched the beating in my chest. Leo, my brother, the golden boy. Always the one who could do no wrong. Always the one Dad admired. The one who got the best of everything, while I was the shadow. I hadn't even been home for 2 months, and now here I was, speeding back like I had some role to play in this wreckage. I tried to push away the questions, the noise in my head. How bad could this really be if the FBI was involved? How deep did it go? I wasn't even sure I wanted to know. The image of Leo in handcuffs, his perfect face, perfect in Dad's eyes, twisted with guilt, maybe fear. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of him. I'd spent years feeling invisible in that family. So many moments when I called about promotions or assignments, and all I got was indifference. So many times when my achievements went unnoticed. Why would anyone listen to me? Leo was the one who had their attention, their pride. But now, he was the one on the other side of the law, tangled in something that didn't fit with the picture they'd all built of him. As I passed the exit to my old town, a cold realization settled over me. I wasn't sure if I was more pissed about Leo's mess or about how little I'd ever been seen in that house, even now. Even now when things were falling apart, I still wasn't sure anyone cared. But the silence in me, the one I'd perfected for years, didn't break. Not yet. It was strange how calm I felt, like I was on the outside looking in. The house looked smaller, quieter than I remembered. The front porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the lawn, the same familiar stretch of grass that had always felt like a boundary I couldn't cross. I stepped onto the porch and hesitated, looking at the door before finally pushing it open. Inside, the air was thick with stillness. No hustle, no clatter, no arguing. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Mom's coffee cup clinking as she took a sip at the kitchen table. She looked older, more fragile somehow. The deep lines around her eyes were more pronounced, the hollow of her cheeks sharper. She didn't look up when I came in, just kept staring at the steam rising from her mug. Dad was sitting across from her, his thick arms folded tightly across his chest, his silence louder than anything he could say. He hadn't even bothered to get up when I walked through the door. The distant, almost indifferent look on his face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about me, it was about Leo, the family's perfect son. "Hey, Mom," I said quietly, stepping further into the kitchen. She looked at me then, blinking slowly as if she was trying to focus. "Oh, Monica, you're here." She barely managed a smile before her gaze shifted back to the coffee. I sat down at the table, unsure of what to say. My whole body felt heavy, like I was dragging through mud. Leo, the FBI. My parents wrapped up in this storm, and I was just another figure on the sidelines. "Any news?" I asked, the words barely leaving my mouth. She shook her head. "Not yet." Her voice was thin, shaky. "They won't let us visit him." Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang, and Dana stormed in like she was running a marathon. Her face was pinched, eyes wide and frantic, like she hadn't slept in days. "Monica, did you see the paper? It's everywhere. The whole town is talking about it." I rubbed my forehead, the beginnings of a headache creeping up. I hadn't seen the paper yet, but I could feel it coming. Dana thrust the paper in my face. "Look at this." The headline screamed, "Youth Coach Embezzles Millions from Mentorship Program." Beneath it, the bolded subheadings caught my eye. Money meant for scholarships and transportation diverted to personal luxuries. Ski cabin, luxury SUV, purchased with stolen funds. I blinked. For a second, it was hard to breathe. The words didn't make sense. It couldn't be real, but there it was. Leo, my brother. "Dana," I said, my voice low, "can we not—" "I don't know what to do, Monica." She cut in, her voice cracking. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know how to talk to anyone about it. Lawyers, the neighbors, the church. What do I say?" I could feel the heat of Dad's stare from across the table, but he didn't say anything, just stared at the paper like it was all someone else's fault. "I'm gonna make some calls," I said, standing up. Dad scoffed. "You're gonna help him by making phone calls." "This is bigger than some waitressing level stuff, Monica." His voice was rough, like sandpaper. His words stung more than they should have. Dana chimed in, her voice sharp. "Monica, we need actual help, not shift money from the tip jar." Her eyes were wild with panic. I didn't respond. I just walked out of the kitchen, ignoring the weight of their stares. I needed air. I needed space. I stepped outside onto the porch, the night cool against my skin, the scent of damp earth filling my nose. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. It was strange how automatic it all felt, finding the right people, knowing exactly who to call, what to say. This was what I did. This was my world. But here, in this house, with my family falling apart around me, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I called a few contacts, requested some information. I didn't know if it would help, but it was the only thing I knew how to do. Behind me, I could hear Dana's voice rise again, the sound of her frantic movements filling the house. But me, I was stuck in the quiet, knowing full well that no matter how much I helped, I'd still be the outsider here. The courthouse smelled like old paper and bleach, the kind of sterile, heavy air that made my lungs feel tight. I walked in quietly, blending into the crowd. There was a hum of voices all around me, people murmuring, shifting in their seats. I didn't belong here, not really, but I knew I had to be. My eyes settled on Leo, sitting at the defense table. He looked smaller than I remembered, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. The golden boy was gone, replaced by a man too far gone to hold any illusions. I sat in the back of the gallery, tucked away in a corner, away from the eyes that would try to read my every move. The trial began, sharp and immediate. The prosecutor stepped up to the lectern, voice steady as he started laying out the evidence. Fake shell vendors, redirected donations, ghost invoices. It was methodical, precise. Piece by piece, the truth of Leo's scam unfurled, each detail more damning than the last. The numbers hit like punches. 2.6 million over 4 years. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. How had this happened? How had he gotten so deep into something that was always supposed to be about helping kids? The gallery murmured. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, trying to breathe through the suffocating air in the room. Leo's lawyer didn't move to object. It was like he already knew there was no defense for this, no way to undo what had been done. I glanced over at my parents. My father was slumped in his seat, his shoulders sagging like all the fight had gone out of him. He was smaller, too, not just physically, but in a way that made him seem more fragile, less certain. His silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. He wasn't angry. He wasn't furious. He was lost. Mom sat beside him, pale as paper, her eyes unfocused, staring at nothing. She hadn't said much since the raid, barely spoken at all. Her hands were folded in her lap, as though she were trying to hold herself together. And Dana. Dana was sitting across the aisle, her eyes darting away whenever they met mine. I could feel the distance between us, even in this tiny space. She had barely looked at me since I'd arrived. No words, no support, just a look of quiet shame. The trial went on, with the prosecutor digging deeper into Leo's actions. The fraud had run like a web, snaking its way through organizations, through checks and balances that should have caught it, should have stopped it, but it hadn't. And now here we were, trying to pick up the pieces. Dana shifted in her seat, uncomfortable, fidgeting with her phone. She wouldn't meet my eyes, even as the evidence stacked up against Leo. I could feel the weight of her silence pressing down on me, making my skin crawl. There was a strange ache in my chest like a muscle pulled too tight. I didn't expect her to understand. Maybe I didn't want her to, because I wasn't here to explain myself. Not yet, not now, not when everything was falling apart. The prosecution's voice rose as they detailed the financial trails, how Leo had funneled the stolen money into his personal accounts, paid for a ski cabin, an SUV. The picture they painted was ugly, a stark contrast to the image of Leo that had been in our family for so many years. The boy who could do no wrong, the one who would always be better than me. As they showed the numbers, the spreadsheets, the invoices, I felt a strange disconnection, like I was hearing about someone else, like this wasn't my brother in the middle of this mess. But it was him. It was Leo. I crossed my arms and sank deeper into the chair, trying to ignore the raw, bitter taste in my mouth. I wasn't here to protect him, I wasn't here to defend him, but I wasn't here to throw him under the bus either. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced down. A message from my office. I set it aside, not wanting to deal with it now. The prosecution finally finished their statement, and Leo's lawyer began to stand. But I wasn't listening anymore. The room had become a blur of words, the case unfolding like something I couldn't touch, couldn't hold. I felt outside of it, like I was watching a movie where I didn't know the ending. And through it all, I felt the weight of my own silence, the truth that I wasn't ready to tell anyone. Maybe I never would be. Thursday morning felt heavier than the rest. The air in the courtroom was thick, like it was holding its breath. The defense had spun their arguments into a web of confusion, throwing out questions about the investigation, about the evidence. But now, the prosecution was bringing in their final witness, Agent Reyes, the FBI auditor. She stepped up to the stand, tall, sharp, her dark eyes focused and calculating as she adjusted the microphone. She was younger than I'd expected, but there was an authority in her voice that made the room settle. She didn't waste time. The flow of money was carefully routed through several fake programs and contractors, she began, flipping through her notes with precision. Donations intended for youth scholarships were diverted to personal accounts linked to Leo Padilla's aliases. Over $2.6 million was skimmed over the course of 4 years. The words hit the air like stones, each one landing with a weight I could feel in my chest. Leo had stolen millions, funneled through a network of lies and deceit. No one in the room could look away. Agent Reyes detailed the methods Leo had used to create false vendors, fake invoices, and shell companies that had all but disappeared once the money was diverted. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting. Back to Leo, back to that boy who had always been better, always been the one to shine. And now, he was a criminal. The defense attorney stood, trying to shift the momentum of the room. His voice was smooth, confident as he asked, Agent Reyes, are you suggesting this investigation was flawless? Was this entire process overseen properly? I felt a knot in my stomach. They were trying to discredit her, trying to poke holes in the case. But Agent Reyes didn't falter. She turned toward the defense, calm, unshaken. Yes, she said, eyes flicking briefly to the gallery, where I sat frozen. This investigation was supervised by Monica Padilla, Chief Forensic Auditor at the Office of Federal Grants and Oversight. The room fell silent. The words hit the air like a bomb, shattering everything. I felt every single set of eyes turn to me, everyone in the gallery, the judge, the defense, even Agent Reyes. It was like they all reached into my chest and yanked out whatever was left of my composure. I didn't know how to breathe. I didn't know where to look. Dad's face had gone pale, like he'd been sucker punched. His eyes were wide, mouth slack. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me, the weight of his disbelief crashing into me. Dana dropped her pen, the clatter of it hitting the floor loud enough that I could hear it over the pounding in my ears. Her expression was a mixture of shock and something darker, like she was embarrassed, ashamed. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her trying to shrink into her chair, to hide. Mom? She didn't say anything. She just covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide, stricken. I could see the tremor in her hand as she held it there, like she was trying to hold herself together. But I knew she wasn't. My heart hammered against my chest. The whole room was staring at me. I had known this moment was coming. I knew it would be impossible to hide forever. But hearing my name, hearing it thrown out there so casually, so publicly, it felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to shrink back. I wanted to hide, to bury myself in the shadows where I belonged. But I couldn't. Not now. Not with all those eyes on me. Agent Reyes kept going, completely unaware of the chaos her words had caused in the gallery. Ms. Padilla has handled some of the nation's most sensitive fraud cases, she said, her voice cool and professional. Her work includes audits in military contracting and offshore fund tracing. She is highly respected in her field. The words cut through the air, and the silence that followed felt like it could swallow me whole. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. It wasn't the time, it wasn't the place. But damn, it hurt. I could feel the heat of my parents' gaze from across the room. I could feel the tension between Dana and me, the space that had grown between us. And I realized then, as I sat there in the darkened courtroom, that there was no going back. That whatever moment I had lost with them, whatever chance I had to explain myself, was gone. And maybe it was better that way. Maybe the silence had always been my real truth. I didn't even make it out of the courtroom before they were on me. Monica, is that really you? Dana's voice rang out, high-pitched, like she was still processing what she'd just learned. She was standing in the hallway, eyes wide, looking at me like I had suddenly turned into a stranger. You're an auditor. That auditor? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kept walking, my heart pounding, my mind already trying to push through the next wave of questions I knew were coming. Why didn't you ever say anything? Dana asked, almost accusing now, like it was my fault I hadn't screamed it from the rooftops, like I had kept something from her. I stopped, the weight of it all sinking into my bones. She looked like she couldn't believe it. Hell, I couldn't believe it either. I wasn't the girl she thought I was, wasn't the girl any of them thought I was. But they weren't ready for that truth. Mom appeared beside her, her face streaked with tears, her makeup smeared like she'd been crying for hours. Monica, why didn't you tell us? Her voice cracked. All these years. We thought... She stopped, swallowing hard, like she couldn't get the words out. I rubbed my forehead, feeling the pressure building behind my eyes. I should have said something sooner, but it never seemed like the right time. And now they were all in my face, expecting me to make it make sense, to fix everything. Every time I tried to tell you, I said, my voice tight, Dad mocked me. He made fun of my job like it was nothing, like it didn't matter. I glanced at Dad then, still standing behind them, silent. The look on his face was unreadable, but I could feel the weight of his guilt pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. I called, I continued, my voice louder now, harder. I called about promotions, about assignments. I told you about the audits, the investigations I was leading. I paused, the words catching in my throat. But you just brushed it off. You laughed. You didn't listen. Dana opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but I cut her off. You thought I was just some casino girl in heels, didn't you? I said, the words coming out in a rush, sharp and bitter. You never asked about what I was actually doing. I was the one approving subpoenas. I was the one tracking criminal wire transfers, not pouring drinks, and smiling at rich assholes. The air around us seemed to freeze. Mom stopped crying, her hands trembling at her sides. Dana stepped back, her face falling like she couldn't bear to hear it. Dad didn't say anything. He just stood there, like he didn't know where to put himself. His eyes were on the floor now, as if the years of jokes and belittling had finally caught up with him, and he couldn't handle the weight of it. I wanted to shout, to scream at him for every time he'd dismissed me, for every time he'd laughed at the things I'd tried to share, but I didn't. I couldn't. It wasn't my job to carry this weight for him, not anymore. For the first time, I felt the truth land like a blow. They had never seen me, never really seen me. I looked at them all, one by one, and I realized I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I didn't need it. I hadn't needed it for years. I've spent my whole career tracking down fraud, I said, finally looking at Dad, meeting his eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. I've been dealing with criminal activity, financial crimes, embezzlement on a national scale, and you still thought I was just some girl handing out cocktails at a casino. I shook my head, the frustration and anger bubbling up inside me. I tried. I really did. But you weren't listening, and it's too late now. You've already made up your mind about who I am. I turned, not waiting for them to respond. I couldn't. The silence that followed was heavier than any of the words they could have said, but I didn't care, not anymore. I didn't need them to get it, not right then. As I walked away, I could hear them behind me, but I didn't look back. It was over. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. The judge spoke, his voice flat, mechanical, as he handed down the sentence, 5 years for Leo, plus restitution. I didn't look at Leo when the cuffs were put on him. I didn't need to see it. I had already seen him crushed, already seen him break, long before the handcuffs. The image of him, standing there in front of the judge, his head down, didn't surprise me. It was the end of a long, slow collapse. Outside, the sky hung heavy, gray, like it might start raining at any second. The wind cut through the air, biting, and the sound of it whispered like it had its own opinion about the whole damn mess. The family gathered in a quiet cluster, standing a few paces apart, like we had nothing left to say to each other. My parents, standing just behind Dana, looked lost. They weren't the same people I had walked into this courthouse with. Dad had been shattered by the trial, by the years of dismissing me, and now Leo's conviction had done the final damage. I hadn't expected to feel sympathy for him, not after everything. But when I looked at him, hunched, his shoulders slumped, all I saw was a man who'd been crushed by his own choices. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was just a man who couldn't stand on his own anymore. And then my dad was there, his face red, blotchy, and tear-streaked. He was standing too close for comfort, his eyes searching mine like he wanted to find something, anything, that could explain the wreckage of everything he had built. You watched me make fun of you for years and said nothing, he said, his voice raw, shaking. The words were like knives, but I didn't flinch. I looked at him, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. I tried, I said quietly, but you weren't listening. He swallowed hard, looking down at his shoes like he couldn't face me anymore. I thought if I made light of it, I could keep you close. His voice cracked on the last word, and I saw it. The years of mistakes, of misunderstandings, suddenly landing on his shoulders all at once. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't interested in defending myself, wasn't interested in making him feel better, but I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to make him feel worse either. This moment, this broken, painful moment, was his to carry, not mine. For a few seconds, I stood in the silence, letting it stretch, not moving, not speaking. Then he looked at me, finally, really looked at me. You never needed my approval, did you? I didn't have to think about it. No, I said, my voice steady, but the words carried the weight of everything. But I needed your respect. The air felt colder now, like the storm that had been holding back was finally going to break. I didn't know what I expected to happen after that. Maybe him to apologize, maybe for everything to change. But nothing changed. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, hands shaking at his sides. His face crumpled, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my father without the armor he wore, He was just a man, trying to make sense of everything he had broken. And maybe that was enough. Months passed. The world outside moved on, and so did I. The trial faded from the news. The aftermath settled into some strange new normal. Leo was serving his time. Dad had retreated into whatever world he created to escape the guilt, and Mom was quieter, less distant, but still fractured. Dana. She'd kept her distance too, like we were all living in different rooms of the same house, not really connected anymore. I went back to my regular routine, the rhythm of work, paperwork, audits, and reports. The days felt long, and the nights just the same, but I was still moving. The monotony was a welcome kind of distraction. For the first time in a long time, the world felt like it was mine to control again. One day, when I was in the middle of a conference call, my office phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but I picked it up anyway. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Is this the Chief Auditor Padilla?" The voice on the other end was rough, a little unsure, but still recognizable. "Yeah, this is she," I replied, frowning. Who the hell was this? There was a beat of silence before the voice continued, a little hesitant. "This is your father." Thought maybe I could finally learn about what you actually do. I almost dropped the phone. My heart did this weird lurch in my chest, and I had to take a second to process the words. Dad, actually asking me about my job. Okay, I said, sitting back in my chair, trying to sound casual, but inside, I was a whirlwind. "What do you want to know?" He cleared his throat, and for a second, there was this strange pause, like he wasn't sure how to go about it. "Well, you always used to talk about audits and investigations, and, well, now I actually understand that it's not just some casino job." I let out a soft, bitter laugh, but it wasn't mean. It was just the sound of years of frustration finding an escape. "Yeah, it's a little more than that." I could hear him shifting in his chair, maybe pacing around, his voice a little softer now. "I don't get all the details, but how does it work? What do you do exactly?" It was the first time he'd asked, the first time he was genuinely interested in something I did, something that had always been dismissed as meaningless in his eyes. So I explained slowly. I told him about the audits, about tracking down fraud and corruption, about the work I did to find the money hidden in plain sight. I told him about the investigations, how we traced funds to places people didn't even know existed, how some of it involved military contracts, and others, well, those were about something more personal, less glamorous. It wasn't pretty work, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The conversation felt strange, like we were both trying to navigate this new territory, trying to figure out how we could fit into each other's lives when we'd been so far apart for so long. But I kept going, answering his questions as best I could, knowing it was more than just curiosity. It was a man trying to understand his daughter for the first time in his life. When we were finished, he paused for a second, the silence between us comfortable for once. Then he said, "There's a town club dinner next week. Think you'd come. I'd like to introduce you properly to the people around here, as well as the chief auditor." I didn't know what to say at first. My stomach dropped, then fluttered. It was unexpected, almost too much. But I knew he was trying. I could hear it in his voice. He was trying to make up for everything he had missed. "Yeah," I said after a moment, my voice steady. "I'll come." He let out a breath, like he had been holding it in. "Good. I'll make sure it's on the calendar." When we hung up, I sat there for a second, the phone still pressed to my ear. The quiet felt different now. It wasn't just silence, it was something else. Something new. Maybe it was a start, or maybe it was just another moment. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was finally, truly seen. The dinner was a blur of handshakes and small talk. I barely tasted the food, my focus mostly on Dad, who had been grinning all night like a man who'd found his redemption. When it was time for the speeches, he stood up, his glass in hand, the room falling silent around him. "This is my daughter, Monica Padilla," he said, his voice clear, proud, Chief Auditor for the Office of Federal Grants. And probably the smartest person I've ever met. The applause came like a wave, polite, distant applause. A few people glanced at me with curiosity, maybe a bit of admiration, but I wasn't sure if it was for me or for Dad, for the fact that he was finally able to introduce me like this, like I was worth something. I looked over at Dana, sitting at a nearby table. She was quiet, but I could see the respect in her eyes. No more judgment, no more distance, just silence. but the kind that felt different, acknowledging, not dismissive. Mom was beaming like she was glowing. Her smile was wide, almost relieved, like I'd given her something she'd been waiting for, even though I didn't know exactly what it was. Her pride was quieter than Dad's, but it was there, in her soft eyes, in the way her hand rested on my shoulder when I went to sit back down. But as the room continued to applaud, I didn't feel the rush of victory I thought I would. It didn't feel like winning. It felt strange. I smiled, nodded, but the applause didn't fill the hollow space I'd carried around for years. I hadn't done this for the applause. I didn't need them to recognize me. I'd gotten used to being invisible, to being the one who stayed in the background. Tonight wasn't about proving anything. It was just about being seen. On the drive home, the quiet of the car felt like a weight that had finally lifted. I hadn't been expecting any of this. Not really. It wasn't about revenge, about rubbing it in their faces that I had finally gotten recognition. It wasn't about any of the old fights. It was just about the chance for them to understand me, for them to see me for who I really was and not who they thought I was. Sometimes, I thought, watching the streetlights blur past the window, it's not about proving them wrong. It's about giving them the time to catch up to who you've always been. And tonight they had caught up. Not because I'd forced it on them, but because they were finally ready to see.